Wow, I can't believe it. It has been 10 years since I've actually worked as a data scientist and machine learning engineer. Kind of looking back, I thought I'd make a video to kind of reflect my experience working in this field for 10 years, as well as other things I think will be relevant in the next 10 years. Software engineers and developers, you kind of need to stay relevant and rebuild yourself and learn new tools to kind of make sure you're always in demand in the market. I guess kind of a little bit of prerequisite. So without going too much into detail, one of the things I think any developer really should know very well is just always be a life learner. That's kind of one of the core skills I would say anyone who, doesn't matter if it's machine learning or any sort of intensive field, being a life learner really helps pay a lot of dividends for yourself and your career in the future. Let's kind of dive into, I guess, 5 core ideas that have kept me relevant in machine learning that are even relevant today. And then 5 ideas I think are going to be very prevalent in the next 10 years to come in machine learning. Okay, so the first one is learning the foundations of machine learning very well as a lot of the foundational models that are being used today. So for example, know how and when to implement and how to fine tune a lot of the classical machine learning models is very helpful. But as we're transitioning into more deep learning sort of format, knowing the core structure of a lot of these models will be very helpful. So for example, ChatGPT, the original paper of attention is all you need, knowing how to fine tune LLMs, right? And then kind of start exploring other sort of large language models as a whole. So one of the skills that I learned very well is how to do data engineering, a data architecture. Models are very helpful, but they're not as helpful as the data pipelines, because with the data pipelines, if you get quality data for your models, you could do a lot of descriptive and predictive analytics. You could also do other things such as use any statistics to build very simple models, or even just use basic statistics to even do preliminary work to actually build a model. So knowing data architecture and data engineering really well is a core skill, I would say, that any data scientist really needs to know. It goes without saying, you spend 80% of your time just cleaning data. So might as well learn the skill sets to keep it very helpful. The other one that's helped a lot is just knowing the AI infrastructure and MLOps pipeline. So I guess it falls under 2 categories, but the AI infrastructure is basically all the tools, at least in the cloud, public cloud and private cloud side of things, that you will need to know. So for example, what kind of resources do you need to gather to make your model work, not just from the little environment you're working in, right, from your secluded environment, but how do you make it integrate and work very well with the overall ecosystem? As a simple example, let's say you have a churning model and you have a cloud provider, right? You want to make sure it has a private endpoint. How do you secure the data so it's streamlined into the workplace that it's actually being used? There's a lot of different examples of architectures, and I'll link some below of like some standard models for Azure. The other thing that kind of falls into this is knowing the DevOps pipeline system. So knowing DevOps very well is very helpful for any software developer, but how it pertains to, I would say, machine learning in general is very helpful, because it has a subtle nuances that are a little different. So for example, if you're training models, right, from, let's say, your development, then you're pushing it to a staging environment or QA, and then finally to a production environment, what are kind of like guardrails in place, right? So is this model using the actual production data or a sample of the production data that it's going to be using? Knowing a data-centered approach to how to build a model. The reason that you have to have data at its core is because if you're building a model, no matter how good it is, if your data is not very good, unfortunately, it's not going to be producing great results, right? So I would say the sooner you could get involved with, let's say, the data processing, specifically from the business perspective, right? Of, okay, if the objective is to build a churning model, for example, for a bank, what is the outcome? Why are you trying to predict that, right? So maybe there's a leak, so to speak, in the data pipeline, and you need to capture that data, right, and fix it. If you're building a dashboard, right, what is the helpfulness of certain key metrics that you're trying to display in the dashboard, right? Is there something further down the road that you may have missed, right? So having this data-centric approach to building models and using it with AI, predictive analytics, and classical machine learning is very helpful. I would say more prevalent nowadays is knowing responsible and explainable AI. Responsible AI has been kind of under scrutiny as of lately, mostly because the lack of transparency with building machine learning models. How was certain models trained on what sort of data, right? For example, the other issue is how is your model being used, right? Is really important, is to kind of have the governance in place. I suppose this kind of goes into the other piece of it is if you're building models, there should be other data scientists or machine learning people or data people that are helping govern the idea of how to be transparent with their users or their data or their customers, specifically on how these models are being used. These are just general things that should be implementing as of now, or you should start implementing in your organization. The other thing I kind of want to talk about is, okay, what are other sort of things that are going to be more important and prevalent as this field of AI starts to evolve? One of my favorite things is to get involved with community and career development. So one thing I would highly recommend anyone is always just be involved with publishing and sharing work, right? So maybe it's getting involved with an open source project, writing a post, writing research paper, writing a blog for your company, just contributing and being active in this community, right? Showing your work is very important. And it's also important to get feedback, right? I always do my best to get feedback from my colleagues as well as people from here on YouTube. Skill, I would say, is prevalent nowadays, is learning a lot of the tools that are available, right? As machine learning gets more and more complex, there's also a lot of different tools that are being brought up, right? So there's a lot of clever IEDs that use AI, VS Code and Copilot, right? There's a lot of MLOps frameworks that help you, such as MLflow, right? Deployment variations out there, right? So there's AWS SageMaker, Azure AI Foundry, Azure ML Studio. There's a lot of different tools out there, and don't kind of box yourself into one. Right now, the prominent language that's being used a lot is Python, specifically for developing these models. Stay up to date with a lot of the up-to-date features or up-to-date models that are being produced, right? So for example, I got a big list in my Google Drive of papers I'm recommending to other people, but also papers I've been slowly reading over the years. And it's really important because I remember 3 years ago, I was starting to learn about large language models, but not many people were using them as they are popular in 2025. So when I first read some of these papers about it, I was really blown away how greatly this technology will be used in the future. That's kind of how I'm evolving my career as a whole, is I'm noticing, for example, agents are being used everywhere, left and right. And that's kind of what I've been learning a lot, is what companies and what different people are using agents for, and kind of how I see the ecosystem of agents being built moving in the future. And then another one is kind of pick your field that you really want to work in, right? Some people want to use AI for finance, maybe healthcare, maybe law. Maybe you just want to use data science to kind of help you engage and become, let's say, a chief information officer, or chief AI officer, right? The important thing is to always be learning for the chance to maybe pick a different path, right? Maybe you don't want to always stay in machine learning, but you know that in 10 years, it's going to be very helpful for whatever trajectory or career path you have for yourself. I would say these are kind of my suggestions. And then I guess the last one, agents, is something I'm very interested in. And in the next video, I'll probably be producing one. So stay tuned, subscribe and like, and stay tuned for that video and next time. But I would say start building things that are relevant and see how you could implement into your company. You may not know where some of your code or, let's say, your demos may land, right? I have no intention of making these into production, but I created a lot of demos in the past, and these have been, scaled up, help me land my future job, right? There's a lot of different ways that you could basically make yourself stand out in this community. I would say that's kind of where I see a lot of this AI going as a whole, is that it's going to be fluctuating with the market, just like any job, right? 20 years ago, maybe Java was the most important language, right? And nowadays it seems to be JavaScript, or let's say C++. 10 to 20 years, maybe that'll be something else, right? So yeah, that's kind of my advice of how I stay relevant as a data scientist, and other recommendations I would say to anyone else. Just know how to stay relevant, stay up to date, just constantly keep learning. Follow channels like this, for example, with more videos to come. But yeah, until then, that's my advice. If you like this video, like and subscribe. And until then, we'll talk later. All right, thanks.